So let me just intro Bayan while he's getting mic'd up. Okay, Bayan is BFFs with Jay-Z. He's the godfather to Kid President. Who knows Kid President? Show of hands. Yes! And he is the right-hand man to Dwight Schrute. This guy is pretty important.
So essentially, like, I got my start, working with a lot of musicians, going on tour with them, and kind of building trust and being a one-man band, filmmaker, editor, director, best friend person. And so this is like a lot of that footage. At one point, this is probably the moment that my career peaked right there. I was considering just giving up at that point and just being like, I would never create another image again. But luckily, there were other things to do after that. One of which is dressing up Rainn Wilson in drag to seduce Russell Brand, and lots of other fun things. And I just consider myself very fortunate because at a certain point, my career evolved from being a, director, shooter, editor into being more of a multimedia strategist. I started that kind of line of work when me and my friend started a production company out in New York called Engine. Eventually, this is a bunch of stop motion stuff because I used to love doing stop motion all the time. We were just a bunch of kids coming out of college, and that is the job that eventually is. We were doing short form content before anybody thought of this is digital content. It was just what they call interstitial content, and eventually that led to a contract with Jay-Z's company Life and Times that he was starting, which was kind of a website forum lifestyle blog. And they just wanted video content for that, so we were, fortunate and scrappy and diverse enough to be considered cool enough to work with Rock Nation and Jay-Z, and that was lovely. The game there was how do you make a video every week? One video a week, and that was like our job for the first year. Just one video a week, and that was pretty cool. I came at that point, it wasn't the most profitable thing, if I'm being straight up. It was really there was no set kind of pricing model for that kind of content. All we knew was that Jay-Z was our hero, and we would work with him, and we were kind of pitching against very well-established content creators. So we came in as just what do you want us to do, and how much do you have to do it, and we'll do it. And so that's what we did. Then I started working, on the side in DC at the Brookings Institute, which, if any of you guys are political nerds like me, then that's kind of the Democratic think tank in DC. They verify a lot of the facts. So basically, right now they're pointless. But anyway. And that was actually news style content, and they wanted to reshape their workflow to deliver daily content. So I went from doing kind of a weekly gig to doing a daily content gig, but it was news, so it was a little easier. And then after about 2 years of that back and forth and working at both places, I think it kind of hit me that I was making a lot of content that was designed to make people want something else. Mostly products. I think anybody who's been in lifestyle a lot can kind of resonate with that, right? There's always a newer pair of shoes. There's always a better watch or a better car or something. And lifestyle content, that job is to promote that lifestyle. And I guess I just, started to become kind of unhappy with the fact that my work was kind of part of that that process for people. So I wanted to find a place that would allow me to make stuff that intentionally made people feel good. Very broadly speaking, just you watch it, you feel good. Doesn't really need to be more than that. And that's when I kind of linked up with friends over at SoulPancake, who they were a website similar to Jay-Z's Life and Times. They started out as a website, which became a book. Dwight, kind of was doing a promotional tour, and he met Oprah, who was starting the Oprah Winfrey Network. And then she had a ton of content she needed made, so she was like, what does SoulPancake look like in videos? And that's when I joined SoulPancake to develop that strategy. They were doing something very similar to what we were doing with Life and Times, where they needed to deliver a video a week for limited resources. And I came on, worked with the founders to kind of translate what they were seeing in their head into video content, and then hired the crew, shot it, DP'd it, colored it, just did anything that needed to be done. And anybody who starts a business understands that, it was kind of at that point all-nighters, sleeping in an office, half this size on their couch, while the export's happening, and then upload it, and it's broadcast the next day. And that was the content that eventually went on to win an Emmy for the short form content category. That was the first time that year. And from that work, we were given a YouTube deal. Google had just acquired YouTube, and they wanted to up the quality of their content. So they asked a handful of companies to essentially create broadcast level content for YouTube, which is what led us to make, our series such as Kid President, My Last Days, Science Of, and a number, at this point, I think we're at about 40 unique series that we've created and distributed digitally.
So explain kind of what SoulPancake is and what it's doing and what you're doing there.
I have a slide for that.
Ooh,
Yes. Wait. So these are snaps. This didn't export, right? oh, it's one of the fancy. Oh, wow. Okay. Do you see that? That's premium effects. So yeah, I mean, SoulPancake, we started out to try to be a company that entertains through positive, thought-provoking, and joyful material. The original run was interacting with people on the streets and creating kind of these interactive art installations. We've made a giant ball pit and invited strangers to sit inside of it and connect over something, anything, and kind of a lot of magic happened during that. We created this box on Venice Beach that people would come up and press a button, and a whole horde of people in heart suits would come and do this choreographed dance around you and just tell you that they love you and give you hugs, and it was just a little burst of love in the day. And people were walking away from these experiences in tears, and for me, again, as a DP, was coming from this lifestyle, very kind of sterile, exclusivity was king there. That was what you wanted to promote, is all very exclusive. But, even if the videos turned out crap, I was man, this stuff is changing people's day, for sure. I see it on their face. And that is, to me, what SoulPancake is, every day we put out content that's just designed to make you think, make you happy, or inspire your next creative project. And so we've evolved at this point to doing, over 80 hours of programming, and we do a video every day, Monday to Friday.
So that's all lovely. I mean, making people smile is lovely. It is. So, but how do you go from something it doesn't sound like there's really any kind of selling point. Like you were saying, you didn't want to sell things anymore. So at what point did you guys begin to get sponsors or people paying you to create this kind of really fun and positive content for them?
Yeah. So, we were lucky that those first 2 years we were funded by Google to make this content, the daily content. But because we were able to develop these very sticky show concepts, such as Kid President, such as these street stunts, brands started just coming to us and saying oh, we want to do a sponsorship of this series, or we'd love to do an integration on that series. So the growth was all organic. We just put in all of that legwork to develop the IP, and then brands just started coming to us. And so for the first 3 years, all of our growth was sales growth was organic. Nobody was reaching out to anybody, and it just, people found us through, not marketing, but the internet.
And so you guys were making the kind of stuff that you wanted to do, right? You wanted people to smile, you wanted something positive when the internet is full of trolls and nastiness and meanness. And because of that, you kind of spurred other companies to want to do the same.
Exactly. I mean, that was kind of the pitch that got us laughed out of rooms in the beginning, right? Was that we want to make stuff that makes you feel good. And at the time, Snooki and JWoww and the Kardashians were at their peak, and so people were like, no, like, people want to watch train wrecks, like they want to.
They said you couldn't sit with them.
Yeah, basically that was the vibe, was that like, a great example is we had this one series called My Last Days. That's a show. It's a show about living. It just happens to be told by people who are dying. So we found people who had a terminal illness, and they were given, a set time that they had left, 3 months. And a lot of times they were younger, kids who were 18, 16, 25. One was a baby, and we were mostly talking to the parents, and TV networks did not want to touch this concept, because it was going to be depressing. It was, I don't know, it just like was toxic to them, and laughed out of rooms. And then we made the show online and we put it up, and it just skyrocketed. And now that show is on its 3rd season on the CW. So like, if there's ever kind of a thing of being like, just trust your gut, right? We were able to take that concept that sounds really dark and heavy and tell it in a really inspiring and joyful way. It's 22 minutes long, so I suggest you go home and watch it. There's like 10 episodes of it, but it was a real eye-opening moment that like sometimes the doors don't just open for you, and you just have to kind of do that legwork to do the proof of concept. And the amazing thing is, when you do that, you're entitled to more ownership in the show. You're entitled to more ownership over your property because it's not a deficit finance property. It's already a proof of concept. It works, it has an audience, and then you're able to leverage that into, maintaining creative control of the show, which I think, like, no matter what creative field you're in, like, that's what everybody wants, right? It's the creative control, like, what we say goes type of vibe, yeah.
So, like, how did you learn all this stuff? I mean, because how old are you? You're super young.
I'm like 29.
But when you started doing all this stuff, there wasn't really guidelines to how to do shorts or like what works. You were doing it at the very beginning, and you were doing it for Jay-Z. So how did you prove yourself? Like, how did you figure out how to do all this stuff? Did you go to school for some of that, or?
Well, I went to film school, but like, obviously this is like a conversation for another day. But like, I don't really believe in film school. I don't really actually believe much about art school. I think there's obvious benefits to it, but like the way the pricing works is kind of like cost benefit, doesn't really make sense. So, but I went to film school. I was a film kid. And the way that we did it, I don't know, I think like there's a lot to be said about failing, until you succeed, and just like not really knowing what you're doing and being just okay with that. But like, I think at the time there was a lot of like just blind confidence that like whatever we were doing was wanted and needed by all of these big companies that didn't know what they were doing for sure. And just by nature of being young, people thought we got it, like the internet and stuff. It was just the internet. It wasn't like YouTube and Facebook and all of these things. It was just like, oh yeah, you understand how the internet works. Yeah, totally. So like, there's a lot of like that fake it till you make it type of vibe that went into it. And then, yeah, I think just messing up and then like coming back, and even when the stakes were that high, when you're talking to these larger than life figures, people that we grew up like idolizing and thinking were perfection, like never really struggled or like struggled in their past and turned that into great art. What we realized is how the not forgiving attitude, but like just the understanding of the process of iterating a brand and what that really means and how long that takes, and being like, cool, we're never actually done, right? SoulPancake's never going to just be like, cool, we were just acquired in October actually, right? But it's not done, it's still like the brand continues to evolve, and I, as the person who's like leading digital, like I'm extremely just open to that. Like I'm constantly actually trying to find people to show me, what do we not have? Like what are we not doing right now that we should be doing, or that matters to you? Like when somebody comes into my office to pitch an idea, which happens at least about like 12 times a week. We were just talking about this. It was like when people come in and pitch me an idea, and they're just like, "What does SoulPancake want?" I'm like, "Oh, jeez." this is not going to go well. Like, it's not, right? Because I'm just like, well, let me ask you, like, what keeps you up at night, right? Like, what are the questions that you're dealing with every day? And that's what I want, you know, like, not, because if I knew what I wanted, I'd just go and make it. Like, it's pretty simple. So like when you hear pitches and you see showrunners or creators who are just like, I don't care if you're going to finance this or not, like, I'm making it anyways. There's something really attractive about that, where you're like, all right, like, okay, you know, this person's got something going on.
Is that kind of what it was like with Kid President when you guys talked to him?
Yeah, kind of similar, actually. Yeah, we so with Kid President, kind of the origin story of that is super interesting, because, you know, him and his brother-in-law Brad's the creator of the show. You know, he's really the mastermind behind why that show is so just, I don't know, just like a breath of light. You know?
Maybe explain Kid President for the people who don't know, because it was only like 50% had seen it, which really is shocking me.
Yeah. No, I'm surprised that 50% have seen it. Like, I'm still at that point where I'm like, oh, you've heard of Kid President? So yeah, Kid President, when he was 8 years old, he was adopted into a family, and him and his sister, and they had a much older sister who was married to Brad, and they were going to have their first kid. And Brad said to Robbie and his sister, he said, you know, I need you guys to be the example for my son, to show what like being an awesome person looks like, or like that kids can change the world, this idea. And Robbie, being like the little sass master that he is just like, I can't change the world, like, I'm just a kid. And Brad, you know, being the ultimate encourager that he is just like, what do you feel like you need to change the world? Like, what is it? Just tell me. He's like, maybe if I was the president or something. So a week later, he comes from school, and Brad has hand-drawn, you know, on a cardboard, a seal of the president, got a broken turntable, used it as a desk with a little stand, and with the camera, it's just like, great, like, let's do it. Like, you're the president now. What do you want to say? And they made 3 videos that they posted on YouTube on a Kid President channel, and that's what caught our attention. A friend of a friend kind of sent the link, was just like, wow, this kid, this is super cool. And, you know, I saw it and I was just like, shit, like, there was something. And you know, for the designers in the room, right? When you see just an image that is so iconic, that is just like, you instantly can see how it relates to culture as a whole, but then does something slightly different. You know, it's familiar, but it's different. You know, you were immediately like, this is a cultural movement. This isn't just like a web show. And he embodied that whole hope of the Obama campaign, you know, like a lot of those feelings that we had in the first year of Obama's presidency, you know, that things are going to get better, and we have hope. And so Robbie was the embodiment of that. And people saw him like that, whether, you know, he was a 9-year-old, 10-year-old kid, you know. And, but that's basically what it was. And I think like one of the things that's always interesting to me, this is like a whole different thing, we'll come back to this, but you know, is this is where it started. That was that set, right? And then this is where it got to. You know?
And didn't you kiss Beyonce or something?
And he kissed Beyonce. We both peaked real early.
And he was only 12.
Yeah, he was 12, so he really like is in it rough now. Like, he's like got his first girlfriend too, and it's just like that poor girl. Like, can you imagine? You know, it's on the internet. It's got like 4 million views of like my boyfriend like kissing Beyonce. Wow. So yeah, I mean, you know, that's the story of how you can do something in your garage that then becomes so important to people that, you know, you get invited to the White House. And that was kind of a really big moment for us to be like, oh, and me to be like, you know, this is what, we talked about this a bit, I don't like to use the word viral. I think it's a misrepresentation of what actually happens, but it really told you about like the kind of content that does pick up, the kind of content that really gains traction and why that is. And I think like a lot of, you know, when you come out of college, like I want to be like cool and like avant-garde and like you know, I don't give a fuck, right? Like, you kind of operate in your own little world, you know, and that's like everything, and your style, and all of that. And Kid President was, for me, the moment of saying, like, no, like, connect with people, right? Meet people where they're at, and the things that we all kind of have in common, but then just reshape it, right? And so, like, what we were looking at here, you know, was this, and I didn't realize this is what we were doing, but this is kind of like the principle that we use for all of our online content, which is, you know, iterative design, which is saying that there's no perfect solution, there's no perfect episode or perfect edit. You make a couple of different options, see which one is the best for the context that you're making it in, release it, get feedback, and change it. So Robbie did, you know, Brad and Robbie did 18 episodes just behind that desk, in their place, did nothing else, and then on episode 19, you know, which is about 3.5 months in of making episodes week over week, and not really seeing any return, you know, like, it was fun, the videos were cool, but then he did the pep talk, which took him out of that room and took him to real locations at a school and at a locker room. And that was based on actually an audience suggestion. Like, what's Robbie like in real life? You know, and we were like, well, let's just put him in the real world then, you know? And that was the video that, you know, got, I think, like 40 million views and counting, you know, 24 million in the first couple of weeks. And there was a lot of really good reasons to that, but the most important thing was that they didn't become so hard and true to be like, cool, this is a series that takes place in this room and this is the format. You know, Brad was open to adjusting and hearing feedback and then reiterating. So that's what we do with all of our shows now. You know, that's kind of the case study that we're just like, look, like, nobody wants to hear the version that it took you 4 months to figure out how to do this. Nobody wants to hear that it took like 5 years for SoulPancake to even like come close to being a recognizable brand, right? Like, that's not the press version of the story, but that's the reality.
Yeah.
You know? Does that answer the question?
That does answer the question. So then, like you're saying, is design, detach, repeat, right?
Yeah.
So how does that apply to creatives in general? Like, I don't know if you...
Yeah. That's a good question.
We hold the mic up closer.
Oh, yes, sorry. How does that? Okay, so with creators in general, there's like always this balance of like taking things personally and like putting the ego in the work because it represents you, and you know, you made it with your hands. You came from your brain to your hands to the thing that you're seeing. So that's a beautiful thing. I think that's probably the most spiritual experience, the closest thing to like, you know, what we understand as divinity. You know, this is getting very philosophical, sorry. That we can come close to. So it's very natural for all of us to feel very attached to the product that we're giving. I think like the best advice that I usually give creators is never just make one version. Like, never stick to one thing that you think is like the absolute perfect thing, because it's just bullshit. Like, it just doesn't make sense, because if I view it in the context, let's just take like an image, when I view that in the context of, you know, that wall or Instagram or in a museum or a gallery, like I have very different expectations when I look at that image and how much time I'm going to spend with it. So the awareness of how people are seeing something seems to kind of get lost a lot in that process of saying, like, this is just what I had in mind, so it's perfect. And, you know, I mean, I would say that process of detachment, of taking a step back, sometimes just time is involved in that, which I know is a resource that we don't always get. But it's important. I think those are the kind of people who, when I look at the relationships with creators that we've had that aren't just like one project and then they go off and see you later, you know, like it's those 6-year-long relationships at this point, 7-year-long creator relationships who've made, you know, 4 series for us, the folks who make it, I guess, at this point, who go on, like, started, our director for Science Of just got a job on Saturday Night Live, you know, and we're so, like, happy for him, but it was watching him go through a process of creating a show, detaching from that show and letting it have a life of its own on the internet, listening to the data that I'm constantly looking at and saying like, yo, like people aren't watching past 75 seconds. Why do you think that is? Let's take a look. And it turned out that like, when the introduction went past that point, we would see a drastic decline in viewers. So it's like, what does that information tell you, Mike? Right? Like, what do you get from that? And he's just like, write shorter intros. And we're just like, yeah, cool. So let's try it. Like, let's try it. Season 2, we come out Science of Love. Like, boom, first episode, like clocks in at like 1.5 million views in the first 48 hours. And we're like, huh. That's interesting, right? Like, it's so weird that like such a small detail can make the difference between the watch time, an average watch time of like, 3 minutes versus 75 seconds. And his career, everything kind of changed from that season 2 point to be like that season went on to just like, be licensed to all these platforms and you see the success by just him taking a second to like look at the data. That was not me talking, it wasn't my opinion. I was just like, here are the facts, man. Like, and he had the, wisdom, he had the detachment to take a step back, not get so scientific getting all detailed in there, just like give the main points, get out of there, get into the experiment. And the show was not any worse off. It wasn't dumbed down. It wasn't like anything worse, which he feared it would be. It was just different. And we repeated that success, and now we ordered 3 more seasons just up front. Just like, here you go, make 36 more episodes now that we figured that out, and that clicked. So that's, a great position for me. Like when I look at it, I'm just like, this is the most mutually beneficial relationship between a creator and a studio, I think, right? Where you're just like, cool, we listen to each other. We were all doing this with the intention of obviously making something great, and we figured it out. And now we're going to order like a year's worth of content from you to go out and do that. Meanwhile, he's like getting offers from SNL to be a writer. It's just like, that's the best case scenario for me as someone who's like developing these, the creators and developing the content and all of that. So
do you have any examples of a time when something just failed flat out and the iteration thing was just like not even an option?
Yeah, I mean, well, the iteration's always an option. You can always change it. You can always like make it better. I think that's like this quote here, right? It's like, this dude's such a G. Yeah, I mean, it's like, you can make it over and over again and keep making it better because you understand it differently and it evolves and it becomes more complex and presented cleaner and all of those things. But I'm glad you asked, Amy, because this is my next case study here. Last year, the race conversation was becoming to a point where it was just like, we had to get involved, like we felt a sense of responsibility to do it. If our tagline is make stuff that matters, we couldn't just skirt issues that were clearly coming up, that were part of the social zeitgeist that people were talking about. And we're like, all right, 2016, we're gonna tackle race. How do we do that? It's a really big freaking topic, and like there's really not a lot of cases that anybody wins in that conversation. Like it's a really difficult, it's a difficult environment to just talk about it. And so, the first thing we were thinking of is just like, cool, so like what we want to do with this series is attack stereotypes, right? Like let's head on, talk to people about the stereotypes that they have encountered being in any of these groups, right? Make those videos, and then at the end of it, kind of like to have a twist where it actually becomes a celebration of like some of those cultural things, because we didn't want it to just be like a pity party, right? Of like, I go through the airport looking like this and I have a beard and it's just like, I'll just immediately go to your special security screening, but there's a balance in that, right? Because there's so much to celebrate about my heritage and where I come from. So while the conversation acknowledges, the intention was while the conversation acknowledges that these stereotypes exist and we need to talk about that, but it's also like the other side of that is we should celebrate diversity. Like we should celebrate this. So anyways, we put up this series called How You See Me. The top 3 is 3 of 12 episodes we made that were talking to different groups about the prejudice, stereotypes that they experienced and what I had just talked about. We were murdered on the internet. We were, man, like I had never seen comments like that on SoulPancake. Seen it other places, but not SoulPancake. It was like, fuck, like, you know, we're trying to do something here. Like we're trying. Like nobody's giving us credit for trying, and you're right. Nobody gives you credit for trying. Like that's an entitled ass attitude to have. Like, so you know, we start getting these comments, and I'm like, I'm sitting there reading them, and I'm like, shit.
And you only released 1 episode?
I mean, yeah, we released the first episode got it hard. The second episode continued to get it hard. Third episode comes out still just being butchered by, just like there was a particular group that was particularly mad at us. Like you could really when you go down, you could identify, that there was, but it was still like, you found that the more engagement that was angry, the less engagement would happen that's positive because people would be scared.
Yeah.
And so you just it becomes this hate fest on the thing. And you're just like, no, this was not the intention. Like, this is so wrong. And then I was going through and I'm like, should I respond to these comments? Like, should I just completely smack down a lot of these comments and just start blocking people? And we always block hate speech whenever it gets into that territory. We're immediately get out of here. But then there were people who were making fair criticisms, right? They were trying to be helpful maybe, or they were just upset for a reason that was their own. But they weren't throwing out slurs and stuff like that. So we're okay. And I was just how do you respond to this? We're not just going to let this go. And of course, in true stubborn fashion, I'm just what we're going to do? We're going to make more videos. So the bottom 3, we invited all of the people from the group to be I'm talking to these folks and I'm while these comments are going down, because I just want to reassure them, I'm look, these people are angry at SoulPancake, just don't take it personally, it's the internet, it's, which I've never had to do before. So that was heartbreaking. To reach out to every single person that was in that video, that was not a happy day. But I was just you know what I want to do? I want to invite all of you guys to come to the studio and let's talk about the comments. Because they were I don't know, should I go in and respond to the comments? And I'm don't. Just, you're only going to exacerbate the issue unless you want to have a freaking 20 thread long conversation, about the history of, gender discrimination. Don't do it. It's, no one's going to win. But I was just let's bring this back onto our playing field, and you guys, let's make videos responding to those comments, right? So the 3 main criticisms that we got on that show were, 1, people were you're playing the victim, right? Why are you guys playing the victim? So it's just cool, let's make a video talking about victimhood and what that means, and why talking about discrimination does not equal being a victim, right? There needs to be a discrepancy there, and we need to talk about it because that's just not a way forward in this conversation. Do labels help or hurt, right? This is actually, I'm really impressed that comment came up, right? It's does that help? When you say, you label yourself, I label myself as Arab or Middle Eastern, is that does that put me in a box, or does that yeah, so that's kind of a complex question that we could look at. Understanding, just the practice of compassion and empathy, and that was just what that episode was about. Just here's how you listen, which is surprisingly, something that we can all work on, So we put out that one. It also failed. Just demolished. Same crowd came on, just butchered. And this is at this point 6 months of making this stuff and dealing with this and
my bosses are like not happy with me, and like nobody's happy. Everybody's pissed. So it's like, great. Then I kind of took a step back, and I was just like, all right, we need to like reapproach this. And I started reading about bias, less about prejudice now, and more about bias. Because I realized, like, man, this race conversation, we just need to press reset and like level the playing field and put nobody on a pedestal. Nobody knows more than anybody else, because the reason is that if you're a human, you have bias, period. Like, that could be from some childhood experience, that could be from your parents. It's just survival. It was a survival mechanism for anything else. So I was just like, great, let's level the playing field and make a series that acknowledges that we all are biased and we all have prejudice, and that will be the starting point for having this conversation, because it just wasn't working. So this was the show that came out of it. We wrapped it around in a blind date show, where people would sit across from each other, not knowing each other at all, and they were given kind of a Mad Libs type of sheet that was just like about, you know, your age, what you do for a living, how you were you raised with or without religion, like how many kids do you want, just based on like the thing, you know, and then you would read it to that person, and they would kind of correct you as you go, and you talk about why there were differences and what you'd expect. And then kind of the B format of that was having two people sit back to back and just talk to each other and have questions. And then at the end, for them to say, like, what do you think that person looks like? Like, describe that person to me. And, you know, the dating episode was like, the hook of that was like, when we first sat down, like, would I date you? I answered that question. And then by the end, after like getting to know you, I answered it again, right? So it was like, oh yeah, by the way, those 8 videos that we made after that, across the 8 videos, have something like 16 million views. Like, those videos just, I don't know. It just like really crushed. I have theories about that, but you know, I mean, I think the other videos collectively, maybe all 14 of them got maybe like 1.5 million views, and then these 8, like, just, you know, we got our largest subscriber. We gained 165,000 subscribers from that show. And people didn't quite know in the beginning that what we're actually talking about is prejudice. Like, what we're actually talking about is bias. And at the end of the episode, that's what everybody's talking about. It's like, why did I make these assumptions about this person that I didn't know? And it was kind of a safe space to acknowledge that. And then all of a sudden, like, you know, you add like sex into the mix, and people are like, "Yeah, I'm into this." You know? So, you know, I mean, but that was that iteration process that eventually led to this, like, the most successful subscriber gain, more than Kid President, which is crazy, you know, to say, because that was such a huge cultural phenomenon. But yeah, that was my case study for like why you iterate, and why, like, it's okay to be mad when something fails. Just like, don't give up, you know, like, just do it again, like, come back to it, like, take a second, come back, and like, don't be, you know, people get pissed all the time about stuff. Like, I don't know, like, I deal with a lot of, like, we have a very emotionally charged office, like, people are crying all over the place. And, you know, I just saw a kitten video, you know, like, and it's just like, okay, cool. But like, you know, and as someone who's like a little bit more like reserved about stuff like that, like, I'm just kind of like, cool, like, I'm like in my office with the tissue boxes, and then I'm like, cool, so now that you're like really emotionally like vulnerable, like, let me show you this video. What do you think? You know? But I think like that process of kind of like taking criticism and stuff with a grain of salt, it's like, I'm still definitely getting better at it. Like, I was on vacation when those videos were coming out, and they were just getting butchered, and I was like on the phone with everybody being like, fuck, screw it, like, what do we do? Should we pull it? Like, oh man, everyone's just like, what did you do? And I'm like, no, I swear, it's gonna be okay. And then, yeah, so I don't know, I think like failures just, and bring it all the way back to, you know, where I started with this, which was like, from working with folks who are extremely successful, you know, you realize like how much they failed to get to where they're at. And at first I thought, you know, oh, they're just like being nice to us because we're young. But the lesson that they were actually teaching me, I think, was like, just like take another swing, right? Like take another shot, go at it again. Like that video wasn't great, do it again, right? And now that once you, whatever, like the 10,000 hours or something, you just start to develop the sense of like what works and stuff like that. So.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we're gonna go to audience questions. So we can get a few in before we break for the night. All right, so does anybody have any questions? John.
How has being acquired by a participant changed the way your business works?
So John asked, how does being acquired change how his business works? Because SoulPancake was just acquired.
That's right, yeah. I mean, we were very fortunate and we found a very like-minded company to join with. They were, again, just like there's a lot of really great situations, but they really see us as the experts in digital. So my role has not changed at all. I've like, as long as, right now it's kind of like in that first year where it's just more like, we want to make sure that we're hitting on the targets that we set for ourselves, and those targets are more aggressive. Therefore, I would say it's a little bit higher stakes this year than it was in past year. Like, I think the dream is you're cool, you like own a company and then you sell it and then you go on vacation for the rest of your life. And it's like, no, like you kind of stick around, SoulPancake isn't a product, right? Like we don't produce a product, we produce a service really. I'm staying, for the next term to show, that we can get to the next level that participants sees us. And they've been actually incredibly encouraging and just really given us the infrastructure, because like any startup, we didn't have a lot of back office stuff like HR and payroll and legal department and all of that. And so they took a lot of that off of our shoulders now. And it's for us to just focus on what we do, which is make that digital content, and so I would say the stakes are higher. There's a little bit more pressure to deliver, but I love that. We're gonna double in size in the next 2 years. Like, bring it on. Like, let's go. Because, I don't know. Like, I think it's without the acquisition happening, right? It's kind of hard to see like the end of the tunnel. Like, what's the light at the end of the tunnel? Are we just gonna do this for the next 20 years over and over? Which I probably would have, to be honest with you. Like, I would have just kept going because I love it. But like this really provided like a different sense of what our goals are. And then having a company that's so socially kind of plugged in as participant, it really opens up a lot of doors for us to, be doing these projects that we wouldn't have otherwise, have thought of ourselves or gone out for, or just like be connected to leading thinkers and philosophers on that stuff. So I think like overall, it's been a very positive experience so far. Our business, we operate as a standalone company with our own P&L. We kept all of our staff. There hasn't been a single layoff since the acquisition, and I just think we're really lucky to have found a company who just believes in us. That just is like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Like we're showing that the business has been successful, so they're not trying to come in and tell us how to work in the digital space.
They iterated on SoulPancake.
They iterated, and now that's where we are.
Do you have any more questions?
How did you know when to stay in? Or like, how did you figure it was worth staying in? Like when you were going through this video process, and all these angry comments were coming at you. When did you choose? Like, no, I want to keep the skin in the game.
Never give up.
Yeah.
Never surrender.
So what's your main course without giving up?
The question was, how did you know like whether to stay in or bail when that video was getting so much hate?
Getting trashed.
Just so much hate.
I guess it's hard because like it was personally important to me. So like its failure felt like a reflection of myself. So like I couldn't live with that. Like that's not good. Like there's a lot of shows that we do that we just do one season of and then like it didn't perform. Like, all right. This was, we were living up to our mantra in trying to make this show and make it in a way that wasn't preachy, that wasn't divisive, So I think if I'm being totally honest, I definitely latched on my personal feelings of success to the success of that format, which you can argue was a good or bad thing. But I don't know. I guess from the way that I positioned it to the team, we did give up on that format and found a better way to do it. You know what I mean? So it was, in a way, you could look at it as being we gave up on the How You See Me format, right? I'm not making any more of those episodes anytime soon, at least. But yeah, I wouldn't give up on the idea that we could host a conversation around this topic, and that was important to me.
And just approach it differently.
And just do it differently, and figure out iterate, yeah. So I think the fun part about the iteration process is that you're kind of constantly failing and succeeding at the same time, So yeah, for every project that fails, hopefully you have one that succeeds too. That's going on. We had another show that was actually doing quite well, so I was able to really latch on to that too and be no, as a whole we're doing fine. But I think, I don't know, I think it comes down to that stubbornness is the first thing that comes to mind, but there are more positive words I could probably use. But yeah, stubbornness. Let's just go with that. I don't think that's a real option to me.
Let's take a couple. Did you have one? Yeah.
Do you ever find that there's a tension? You showed a slide earlier that had kind of clearly defined values of SoulPancake.
Yeah.
Is there ever a tension between having those values and then also expressing iterative design and trying to accomplish this other thing with feedback from other people? Or what does that process kind of look like?
Yeah, so the question is SoulPancake has some guiding values that you saw in the kind of Venn diagram, that triple Venn diagram. And so how do you incorporate, if I'm understanding correctly, how do you make sure to incorporate the mission into every iteration, as well as deal with feedback that takes you away from that mission? Yeah. I think execution, there's a lot to be said about how you do something, where it could be any concept, and I could find a way to make it SoulPancake, right? Similar to the My Last Days show, is that could have been done in so many different ways, but there was only one way that was SoulPancake. And so becoming really tuned in to the idiosyncrasies of what that means is just part of being there for 6 years, and developing what that is. So we constantly kind of have this it's not a cop out, but it's it's basically we get a pitch and we're is this SoulPancake? And it becomes this adjective, and that the owner, we just throw around.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when we talk real, I'm just give me anything and I can spin it to be SoulPancake.
Yeah.
So it's kind of is there a subject matter about the human experience that is not SoulPancake? I would argue no. It's just about how you do it. And I think the way that we focus on is being how do you make this feel good? When you walk away from this thing, and it's this nebulous idea, but it's very you can tell. You don't have to be that emotionally intelligent to be what is the conversation that comes out of watching an episode of The Kardashians, right, versus watching an episode of Kid President? What kind of conversations does that lead to? And it's not really it's not hard to figure it out, being does this make me feel good? Yes, probably good for some. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about it. Cool.
Let me saw a hand in this area. Go.
I love your shirt.
Do you see any value in releasing work with comments off? In letting the work speak for itself?
Not on YouTube or Facebook.
Don asked if he saw value in releasing content with comments off.
YouTube to understand YouTube, you really need to understand that community. And it's kind of like, would Reddit, if you turned off the comments on Reddit, right, would it be the same place if it was just people essentially posting blog, just like long posts?
Like a one-way conversation.
Like a one-way conversation, so part of understanding and being successful on YouTube is developing the sense of community that invites people in to engage. And if you don't have those, like, SoulPancake has 2 million fans but on YouTube, but it's not like 2 million people watch every video, But there is that, like, small group of, like, 15,000 people who are just, like, diehards, right? Who, like, they're commenting. There's this one dude, Philip Gibson, who, like, oh, no joke, like, really real shout out to Philip.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, I've already, like, reverse catfished him. So, he lives in Idaho. I don't think he's going to be here anytime soon. But, like, he's commented on every single video that we have made since 2013. Like, this dude is like the heart of our comment section, and so to not allow Philip to that moment to, like, get his comment out there, and then for SoulPancake to be like, yo, Philip, thank you. every comment that Philip makes, SoulPancake responds, because we have that relationship where I'm like, we post out a video and, like, by about 10 a.m. I'm like, where's Philip's comment? I'm gonna love that comment, and I'm gonna, write and be like, thanks, Philip. Like, couldn't have said it better ourselves. Like, and it's literally just this love fest back and forth. But that's how I think YouTube is a place where you create super fans, right? You create your own. What's that word? It's not evangelical. That's like
Advocate.
Advocate. Thank you. Who said that? Yes, thank you. You create, like, your advocates. You create your own marketing by creating a space that people can comment and feel okay about it. And it's kind of like when you turn off the comments, at least for most YouTubers, like, we see it as like an admission of,
We're afraid.
of fear, like, we're not willing to engage. We just want you to see this. And it becomes a passive process for the audience, which is television, as opposed to an active process for the audience, which is like, we ask a question at the end of every video, so, like, that's the point of SoulPancake, was like, we're gonna have conversations about life's big questions here, so let's have that. I think, maybe if I release Kendall Jenner's Pepsi ad, I would.
I was going to ask you about that. Is there ever stuff that you produce that you, like, someone right away at the end of it, it costs you money to make it, you're like, whoa, this thing it's tone deaf, or you've actually produced the video and you realize we shouldn't Pepsi our way through this.
Yeah, so you're saying, basically, have you ever produced something that you're like, it's just super tone deaf, or you're embarrassed about releasing and nervous about it? And I would say that season, How You See Me, is probably, like, that's, like, the closest we got. I think
before it came out,
even before
you knew, like, it was going to cause some controversy.
Even before it aired, you're kind of like, you're touching on a subject that, like, pushes a lot of buttons. So I was prepared for it. I don't think I was quite that.
Is that why you left the country?
Yeah. So, like, I'm going to freaking Costa Rica. Yeah, I don't know. Like, you got a sense that you were like, I'm uncomfortable about it a little bit. And then, but I think, like, the inner dialogue was like you kind of should be uncomfortable. Like, it should, right? This is not a comfortable topic. So either we're going to make something that feels like a little bit skirting the issue, trying to, like, avoid the tough topics, and that would be something that would be very comfortable for SoulPancake to release, right? Like, it's just like, let's just talk about all the great parts about being, Arab. And it's like that. People on YouTube would be equally pissed, like, they'd just be like, great, yeah, like, way to, totally gloss over the, an entire struggle. So again, like, it was going into it realizing this is, like, what is the win-win here? Like, a ton of views, but a lot of hateful comments, like, I don't know, I guess I just didn't, usually I'm like, okay, like, how do you get to the win-win? Like, that's kind of like my guiding philosophy in working with almost anybody, is being like, okay, this didn't work out, what can we do to make it work? But I don't know, that show was so different than anything we did that it was uncomfortable and we weren't sure. And yeah, but I don't think, you know, in television, in film, you know, companies throw huge sums of money into development, right? Most of the stuff that comes out of that development you never see or hear about, right? Like, yeah, like what about that show with DJ Khaled, you know, riding a jet ski from place to place in Miami? Like, this was a real concept. That was, yeah, like after he got lost at sea in his jet ski, but he was actually only like 2 miles away from the coast, and like, you know, that's what like sparked his huge Snapchat popularity. That was a real show, you know. But nobody, of course, like is talking about that show because it's so ridiculous. But like, I think like our development process is such that we're like kind of like, yeah, like, you know, we spend the money, we're making it. Someone might like that DJ Khaled show, you know, like someone somewhere would watch that, all like some jet ski enthusiast and Ski-Doo would probably sponsor the show, right? By the way, this was not a SoulPancake concept. I just realized it kind of sounds like we developed that, not us. So short answer, no, we've never made something that we didn't release because like I'm already like kind of in it with the creators so much, and like if it gets to that point, we know even before it's made, I think, you know, when to cut it off. Kind of. I can't even think about it. It's only happened like twice in 6 years. So and that was because of like something, you know, legal or whatever. But like, yeah, so.
All right, guys, let's thank Bayan. And if you guys have any more questions, come